If you own a Ring doorbell or a Nest doorbell, or any other kind of doorbell for that matter that records video and audio, then you need to pay attention to the two following changes that you need to make and why you need to make them. By the way, these are fantastic devices for security of your home. They alert you when someone comes nearby to the door, a person standing there delivering parcels, and so on. I will link the Ring doorbell that I use in the description below because they are very useful indeed. So welcome back to my channel, but if you are new to me, I'm a barrister who helps you understand law. And not that long ago, I did an in-depth video on the judgment in the Fairhurst and Woodard case, which was overseen by Her Honour Judge Melissa Clark. This was something of a test case for Ring doorbells. It involved a number of different issues with regard to data privacy and the Data Protection Act, but also harassment and various other things. You'll find the in-depth video in the description below, so you can go and take a look at that. But more pertinently for this video, just two things that you really need to think about changing. Now, I've even given advice in conference on this issue, and I'm sure I've covered it in other videos before. But the two issues really that you need to pay attention to are, one, that if someone is passing by your house, or the video is trained on some other house opposite you and monitoring the comings and goings of that person or household, then you are engaging the Data Protection Act, in that the person who is captured on that video, captured obviously being like captured within the frame and stored to memory card, if that person or people or whoever it is being captured on that video, they have certain rights, such as the right of subject access request, which they can make to you if they are specific enough about when and where and how they are captured on your video. But moreover, an issue that was highlighted fairly prominently in the Fairhurst-Woodard judgment is that of the intrusion of privacy and that capturing more than is reasonably necessary in respect of audio. Because these devices can obviously capture audio. Picture a scenario where your neighbours are walking past your house or in the garden, if your camera is near enough to the garden to pick up the audio recordings. It may well record conversations that should otherwise remain private. And it's more than reasonably necessary for the purposes that you're capturing this information in the first place, because if you've got the device there for security purposes, that's one thing, but if it is ultimately monitoring, as in recording constantly or surveilling your neighbours or passers-by and recording their conversations, this is more than is reasonably necessary, and it could well be an intrusion of privacy. And if it is capturing your neighbours on a regular basis, they would have a reasonable complaint against you. And based on the Fairhurst-Woodard judgment, they might be entitled to damages if they sue you for breach of data protection laws. Particularly in some fairly distressing comments that people have sent to me, where cameras have been trained on their garden watching their children play. Now, as I've said before, you don't need to be a lawyer to work out that that is plain wrong, and that is certainly outside of the remit that the Data Protection Act should permit. It certainly is monitoring, it certainly is over and above that which is reasonably necessary, because if you are going to capture any part of your neighbour's garden, you need to be able to justify it and note that justification down. At most, really, you should be having the utmost slither of the other side of the fence so that you can capture somebody climbing over the fence if it's a reasonable concern of yours. But if you consider the audio recording and it's capturing your neighbours on a regular basis, you might want to consider turning off the audio recording. That's the first thing that I would suggest that you change, because that is one of the things that this judgment really did highlight as being beyond that which is reasonably necessary and might well place you in breach of data protection laws and therefore open to a damages claim. The second thing that you might want to consider changing is that which Ring and Nest and other devices have now implemented, which is a privacy boundary whereby it will not capture and will not record people within a certain part of the frame of vision, meaning your camera can capture the area just in front of your door and as close as reasonably necessary. But let's take the scenario where your camera is facing directly opposite another door, opposite you, let's say in a flat situation. You can blank out that particular area of the door to prevent your camera capturing the people coming out of there and thus monitoring them unnecessarily and potentially placing you in breach of data protection laws. All of these are now readily available, they are easy to use, and if you are using these kind of apps successfully to access these cameras, it isn't really an excuse to say that you don't understand how to implement these functions, because they are fairly user-friendly and there is help on tap. So if you take the choice and the decision to use these cameras, you really ought to be using them within the law. And as many people have questioned, just because you can buy something doesn't necessarily make it legal. And conversely, just because something is illegal to use in a certain way doesn't make it illegal to buy. So if, like me, you've got cameras trained around your property, do be sure that they are capturing only your own property. And if there is anything outside of the curtilage of your property that is being recorded in any sense, make sure that you can justify that and that it's kept to an absolute minimum, particularly if it's audio recording. So those are the two things that I would absolutely recommend that you change. You either turn off your audio recording if you really think it's going to capture your neighbour and you haven't discussed it with your neighbour, which is one option. You could ask your neighbour, are they okay with it, and just make sure that they're aware of it. If they are aware of it and they're okay with it, then that's fine. You might say to them that it's in both of your interests that it records everything for security purposes. You might even ask them if it's okay that it's trained on part of their garden as well, which might enhance their security. They might well be happy with that, but if you've not discussed it with them and they're not happy with it and they make a complaint about it or a court claim against it, then you might well be open to damages. So those two things I would absolutely recommend you change. The audio, either perhaps consider turning it off, and or the privacy regions that you stop your cameras from recording, particularly if they are motion activated, as most of them are these days. And finally, just remember that if someone does make a request to you, don't get into an argument about it. If they are captured or they're likely to be captured, then they can make a request to you for that information. You don't necessarily need to register with the ICO if you are a purely domestic household, but of course none of this can be taken as legal advice because many people are working from home these days and there is a split between the two. And if it's a business and you're capturing personal data, personal identifiable information, which is any piece of information, whether taken by itself or together with other information can identify a living individual, it is personal data, personal information for the purposes of data protection laws. So make sure you're on the right side of these things because the damages can be quite significant if you are not, and you could be facing a claim against you, which not only could put you at risk of damages, but you probably would have to declare it when you are selling the house as well, if there's been civil litigation between you and a neighbour. So I hope this was useful. I hope it's answered some questions that I've seen come flurrying in from various videos, which I will link again in the description below. If you want to get more guidance on very specific situations or learn how to handle your case in court, check out the discount code on screen, which is Black Belt Support. That's you supporting me for me supporting you, which will give you a hefty discount off my website, BlackBeltBarrister.com, which is on screen in all of my videos and linked in the description below, where you can get exclusive access to various videos teaching you the principles of court, examination in chief, cross-examination, preparing a case, and so on. I hope you find that useful. Please do like the video and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.